some type of thumbs up that you can see the template now on the screen, that'd be great. All right, awesome. And if those are, we have some folks joining, later or watching the recording. If you do get a copy of the slideshow, the first slide here has a link to that template copy. So if you do want to make one from there, you can as well. So as Amy said, my name is Mackenzie. I usually go by Mac, so you can feel free to call me Mac. And I work up in the northern New York region in the Adirondacks at Paul Smith College as a student success librarian. So today I'm really hoping that what I share with you will be something you can take away. I have found a lot of joy in looking at how to kind of reinvigorate my storytelling of the library. And a lot of that came from some things that came out of a Northern New York Library grant, actually. So I'm going to give you guys a little background about myself. You do not have to read all of this. I'll give a kind of a summary. I was joking with Amy earlier. I don't usually put this much text on my slides when I'm presenting, but as this is more of a workbook, I want folks to feel free. Add in as much as you would like on your own. The copy you made is your individual template. It's not being shared with anyone else. So add in what's useful to you. As Amy mentioned, I have a lot of experience across different areas in the library. I've mostly been in academics in reference and instruction, but a couple of those areas have been, like cross-public and academic. I also did a year as a school librarian for a pre-K to 12 recently, and a lot of that came from moving. So moving areas into different areas in the rural New York, I decided to try on some different library hats and learned a lot about different areas of librarianship. I also serve on a public library board in Saranac Lake, where it's close to Paul Smith's and where I grew up, and really enjoy it. I've been on it for 3 years, and it's really taught me a lot of great insights from the public library side of things as well. Most of what I've really found is that we tend to have a bit of a marketing problem in telling our story without it being told by others with misconceptions, and it can cause a lot of frustration. I know for me, it has caused in and out of times kind of either burnout of not wanting to answer the same question because I felt like they're not going to get it anyway. And I've, throughout the last few years, found a better way of kind of reinvigorating myself in that too. So when I had this new hat of being a school librarian, a part of that was that I would have to get a additional certification in school librarianship for New York State. And within that, I had taken a couple graduate courses at SU. And the course that really was probably supposed to cement me back into that career as a school librarian just made me want to go back to academics and talk a lot more about why I felt those were so important in that level of communicating the story. And that was just a standard library leadership and management class. The instructor was really great, and there's definitely something to be said about working in an industry for a long time first and then going back and taking one of those classes again and being like, oh yeah, there's a real return to we all have united standards in different things, whether that's, ethics on like ALA side or maybe more individual with ACRL or professional organizations if you're a more specialized librarian. So those were things that made me want to tell these stories a bit more finesse. Give something more of how I am passionate about it as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with these things. And I really wanted to make sure that folks who work in any aspect of the library, whether you work at the front desk, if you're solely ILL, if you're a director, if you do instruction like I do, we all lead the library in some way. We are all telling a library story. Libraries are united by a lot of national standards, some state standards, some different professional standards, but we also have institutional ones. So how can we all feel like we're telling the right story when we maybe get some of those doubters that we want to change their viewpoints? So that's something that I am really passionate about kind of correcting as we go. These are some areas that I have felt really influenced me recently. So one of them was that class that I took through SU, and that was also partially funded by Northern New York Library Network. So big thanks to those folks, Meg, the committee there, and just the support for it. It was a really, really great class. I've also been kind of sampling from that, being like, we have to unite again and like tell the story. But how do we do that? So I've been really trying to figure that out for the last couple of years and been kind of taking pieces of different webinars, books, presentations, toolkits, benchmarks, and figuring out what I think might work as a whole formula. because I feel like I'm hearing great work from some folks and it just wasn't connecting for my mind. So I took a little bit from Dr. Kate McDowell's Critical Data Storytelling for Libraries. That book itself is incredible. I'll have it linked later in here as well. And her toolkit also really, really helpful. Big fangirl over here for her. Kathy Dempsey has a great one on creating talking points and another great book on the accidental library marketer, which I know many of us fall into that role sometimes. Another recent panel was on using data for presenting the value of the academic library. And those ones all I felt were really connected. At Paul Smith's, I tend to do all areas of subject instruction, but a lot of it is focused on environmental and geosciences. So I also threw in one person that I tend to see anything that she's presenting is Dr. Emily Wild out of Princeton in the Geoscience Information Society. Just had a great presentation on conspiracy theories, and it was called The Data is Out There, and it was just really enjoyable. So that's where some of this is coming from, pulling elements into making a kind of greater story. So today I'm hoping to show you guys just the general formula I'm using with a couple examples, and then we'll get into the actual meat of it ourselves. So as I talk, please feel free to start typing away as to what makes sense for you. I have an example slide for each of the ways I've broken it down, and then you can delete that if you'd like to, because it's not useful to you, or you can have it there to refer back to, and then I have a blank one right after it. So I'll show you that as we go as well. We're going to be looking at the audience. So that's something that I have been pulling, especially from some of these great speakers who are looking at what kind of marketing they're doing and how they're explaining the value. You have to know the audience that you're talking to. And I've decided that into a daily audience, you kind of the people you serve, your service audience, or your purse string or money audience, who are the people you report out to, who give you the funding, who let you do your job. And then we also want to try to identify what are we doing well now. And there's a great way to kind of parse that out that I think is helpful when communicating. And then we need to figure out what kind of standards and data. We don't want to overbloat. That was a big thing I've taken from almost every of these elements that I've been pulling from is the oversharing of massive amounts of data is hurting us over time. So if we can pick really specific metrics and make them make sense for standards, the specific audience we're using, and maybe use more of a narrative storytelling instead of just saying, here's this, here's that, it went up, it went down, we need this or we don't need that. So working that into how we work as well. And then at the end of the presentation, there's a bunch of blank templates that you can use as well. So first one I want to just address, there's many ways that we might need to talk about marketing. We might have short answers. You know, the little elevator pitch when someone says something that's a little bit frustrating or with a misconception sometimes. You know, working in a quiet space must be so nice. It must be nice to read books all day. Do people really use the library anymore? I think there's two parts of this. We definitely want to have something to say back that shows our value and brings them into the conversation. But we also need kind of long-term planning as to how to address that and hopefully break down those viewpoints over time. So that's something I'm really working on, and a couple of metaphors for those quick responses that I've enjoyed recently. One was from the instructor of that course at SU. His name is Jonathan Cawthorn, and he used to give an example when people talked about getting rid of all print media, saying, you know, digital's there anyway. I can find everything on the internet. Why would I need something else? What is the purpose of a library still? And he used to give a great one of imagine all of the world's history and information on your hand and then fold in your thumb. And what is accessible and often located, digitized and publicly accessible might be your thumbnail. So think of what people are accessing easiest because you still want to actually point people to the right direction and actually instruct and help. So I've loved that one. I think it's really visual and really helpful. It's a quick response, though. It's a quick storytelling response. We do need some longer planning as well. And then I also got to give a shout out. My current library director, Andy Kelly, has a great one when people ask, "What's the library do? Like, what is the purpose of the library here?" He likes to give a metaphor that our library is a three-legged stool and it holds up the student's success at the library, and it's made of the student's space being one leg, the services the library offers being another, and the resources that we provide as another. And you kind of wait to see which part of their eyes light up and follow that path. If they glaze over on space, don't talk more about space. So I really enjoy those kind of funnels into the conversation. All right. So the spoiler, we're working backwards. this is the general formula that I've been using and I'm finding more success with and kind of editing as I go. Decide who your audience is. Is it the daily folks that you serve, or are you trying to kind of pitch something and show your value to the people who hold the money? And from there, you need to figure out, are you trying to pitch an impact, a current success you have, or are you showing that you have a need for something? I would highly recommend that you don't go with needs first. So today we probably will focus more on impacts and success so that you have those touchstones to come back to. These are things going really well and ones that I can list out and just remember off the top of my head. Standards and data. This tells us we have some evidence as to why this is such a good impact for you. And we know it's good because of the standards we use. And from there, I would just remind folks that we're probably looking at professional standards and your local institution standards. So whether that's a strategic plan at the institution level, the library level, department level, but we also have a ton that we can pull from in professional realms as well. And then we have all those elements, but how do we actually make it memorable? So this is where Dr. Kate McDowell's work really comes in, is that storytelling element. It's the narrative. How do you say something that people are going to come back to? And much like a lot of these other parts, you don't want to overload. We want simple stories that people can walk away with. So as we go through, you might want to return to some of these slides as you go. Think of one piece at a time. And I'll give you guys just a basic example of one I've been working on recently. So this is one from, again, I'm from instruction. So if you are not from reference and instruction, yours might look a little different. That's totally fine. You'll see that in some other examples. But this is what I would do if I'm trying to talk to students as my daily audience about an English 102 class. It's a general education course required at Paul Smith's. They have to take it, and it's where they learn how to do a research writing paper and how they synthesize sources. So Paul Smith really cares about experiential learning. It's part of like strategic plan. It's one of the reasons why a ton of the students come here. So I have transformed some of how I've been doing instruction into experiential workshops. So to prove why I think that those are going well, I looked back at the assessment data from the most recent pilot of that, and I have 8 sections of it this coming spring. So I want those students who come into it to buy in. And I'm not going in every day, but I'll go in for probably 4 to 6 times throughout the semester. And I want them to know how valuable having a librarian there to talk to them about source synthesis and finding an organization is. So we found some really great data from it, but I know my audience is students. I might not be the best person to sell that story. So when the storytelling side of things comes up, I might want someone who they're going to trust more because I'm selling the product. They're like, great, of course she wants to talk about how important the library is. She's the librarian. So I'm looking for maybe the faculty member who I co-taught with, or maybe some of the previous students I've had who I had built good relationships with to kind of help me out with the storytelling. And when I looked at standards and data, I pulled our experiential learning standard. And then the data we pulled from which ones came to the workshops. And I am a part of that class, which is something that I worked on over years of really developing that daily audience relationship with faculty. So I have a good relationship with them. I'm in their online class. I can see their grade books at the end. The students who attended the workshops consistently had a much higher final writing grade on that final paper than the ones who skipped all of it. So trying to explain to them that it's not just that the paper is the product, it's the process of writing. And that's what those instructors are really passionate about. They want students to understand revision, practice of writing, and gathering sources to a collective understanding. So those are some things I'm really considering how I want to tell that story. So one way, I'm not going to show them a spreadsheet of grades. I might just pull out 2 of the big impactful numbers, color them bright, send that presentation to the faculty member, and have her talk about the impacts and see if I can get her to talk a little bit more about, why we like this being a process, why it's important to attend these things and think of writing as a process over time. So that's just something I have found helpful when breaking down how do I want to communicate that this new project I've been doing is actually effective. I want to break it down into who am I talking to? How is it impactful? What's my evidence? How do I tie it to something? And how am I going to tell it? So I'm still working on how I'm going to actually present it, but this is my first thought on this one. So given that, I want us to just dive into audience. So from here, I want folks to look at their screens and fill out what they can. We're not going to have, everything filled out. Again, I don't usually show folks this much writing on a presentation, but this is my example of when I'm filling this out, I'm adding anything in that I can think of. So the next slide you'll see is a blank one for you to put in your own information. So a patron type. What are the patrons that you see often that you serve? That are not ones that are like holding the resources and the funding. They're the ones that you are serving with your skills, expertise, and services. So for me, I pulled out that I see a ton of undergraduate first year students. I see undergraduate senior capstone students. So that's our culminating experience for seniors at Paul Smith's, but it might be, of course, something different where you are. And then I also wanted to leverage how much I have of a daily audience with faculty, because the faculty are my window to students. They're how I access students and get my job done. So I need to make sure that I'm having good relationships and really interacting with them and pitching that there's great use to having a librarian come in and using resources, even when you don't have the librarian in. So I would love to see folks just take a couple minutes, and even if you get one or two of these done while I talk, um, think of how you interact with them on a regular basis. Where do you interact? If folks work at front desks, you might have a very different audience. You might have more specific groups of, I see this program student pretty often. I see student workers really often. I see public patrons really often. You're going to have a different one there. And then after you've figured out kind of how you see them, what's the regular interaction like? I would also think of, what do you hear from them often? And it doesn't always have to just be a question. It could just be feedback, which sometimes is positive, sometimes it's kind of more in the middle, or sometimes it's more apathetic. It just depends on the relationship of that particular patron group. So think of what they say. And this is not a dig at my faculty at all, the ones with their common feedback. It's just honest. They often don't have time to figure out what the library has. So I need to make sure that part of my messaging is connecting them to what those resources are. Or they might just say, I don't think the library has what I need. I'd be like, okay, I need to break down that barrier and see what I can find for you. And then if that's what they're still saying after I can't find what they exactly want, maybe I can elevate that to someone and be like, hey, we don't have what our faculty need. And then especially in the last few years, we've had a lot of requests for, I need help to update my class to deal with AI. So I get that, I think, probably even more often in the last 6 months. So as you folks fill this out, there's all sorts of things that you can put in there. I'm trying to give like general timelines of like 4 or 5 minutes on each section, and then we'll kind of keep going down through it. And I'll talk about a couple different kind of examples as we go. So you got probably another minute and a half on just filling this part out. While you do that, I'm going to talk about another one that I think went really well this semester. So I instruct a lot. I am always flooded with data. So I'm going to show a couple things here. I do a survey with my first year seminar students. I do a big digital escape room with them, and it's awesome. It's really fun, but I don't want to show anyone actually this data. This is way too much. There's no reason for me to show all of this graph work here. It's too much data, data bloat, but I also don't want my data to go stale. So I've been trying to figure out a way to tell that story a little bit better. And so what I've found recently is that really pulling out just a couple metrics of what those students have self-assessed their growth. And I only go in for one session with this class. But throughout their first year, I see them in a bunch of other ones too. So it's not the only time they see me. But I specifically focus this one on like the career ready side of things. So how do they know how to navigate an information system? How do they know how to do these kind of things? And this one, I would probably aim at more of my direct supervisors, because the work that goes into this is a lot. It takes a lot of my personal time. So I want to kind of prove like, hey, I make all of these digital escape rooms for each class, and it's an interactive thing that they all seem to enjoy. So this is why I'm going to prove it's working. So even at their first year level, they're giving themselves a rating of what they find comfort with library resources, with personal research, and with researching a new topic. They rate it 1 to 5, least comfortable, most comfortable. Before class, 40% of them rated themselves 4 or 5, comfortable to very comfortable. after class, 82% of them have rated themselves 4 or 5. So if I'm going to share that with someone, I don't want to show all those random tables that I had. And I've worked over 5 years doing the same kind of project, trying to figure out a better way to do it. And recently, this year, I think I came up with a better one. So this year, I'm showing waffle charts of the actual difference for just a quick visual of it. Or I'm going to do just the giant numbers. Or I might do the word cloud of the qualitative data where I ask them, hey, if you have any feedback that you want to add to this that I can make it better, what would you like to say? And I really enjoy this one mostly because one of the comments was just pretty chill. I was like, that's very authentic. Thank you. I'll definitely share that with my administrators. Very chill. But I really felt like this was something that I can actually tell a story about because I have a combination of some qualitative things and like anecdotes from them, and I have a pretty stark difference in how they rated themselves. Because I do a lot of assessment of their grades, which is me telling the story, but this is more of them telling their own self-assessment. So it really kind of put it into a different way. And in the past, I have used bar graphs, charts, and side-by-side tables to show administrators this and just glazed right over. So I'm really looking forward to telling this story in a different way in the future. All right. Wherever you ended on your daily audience, we're going to move on to a different chart where we think about our money audience. So these are the people who are our resources. We can think about it as like a service audience versus a resource audience. They're the ones who approve our funding, they're the ones who approve staffing levels, potentially hours, entire directions. For me, where I am in like the hierarchy of my institution, I have a library director over me. We are all overseen by like academic support services by the dean of curriculum. And then that dean is our representative at the college cabinet. So they're everybody. So those are the folks I chose. In yours, you might choose different folks. You might want to put in even like a colleague who's like someone you work with often. You might just want to put in cabinet or something like that. You might have a provost, you might have a VP, whatever that might be, whatever's helpful for you. This will, I say, in my opinion, this is the one that like fires my brain in the right way. This table is helpful for me to organize. And this is particularly where we can identify what might be some barriers. And I've called them pain points here. So it's not necessarily that these people are bad by any means. They're just people we work with who might have different motivations or different things on their plate. So how we communicate with them should be really strategic. So if I'm looking at my library director, at my institution, we're a little strapped for staff. So he's got 2 titles. He's busy. He's in a ton of meetings to represent academic affairs. I need to be really careful of my time with him because I don't want to take up too much of his time and he's busy. So I think about that with like a pain point. Our dean of curriculum might get a notice from cabinet that budget cuts are going to come. And that is going to be a pain point for us when we have an interaction. So how do I think about maybe proactively proving a budget versus having to defend it on the back foot? And then cabinet, of course, they want to see data. That's the biggest thing we've been hearing for a very long time now is what is the data? However, they don't have experience in library data. So when we flood them with library daily operations data, we don't really help ourselves. So pain points is a really good one to kind of think through how you want to address. And then the motivations and decision-making power I found really helpful for myself to outline for each group that I might talk to that's really important for me. You know, I'm not going to talk to the college cabinet about the same things I'm going to talk to the library director about. I'm not going to talk to my dean of curriculum about the same things that I talk to my students about. You know, her area of expertise is going to be really focused on coordination of academic programs and successful accreditation. So if I am going to talk to her, how do I communicate to her now? Do I have an idea of how I might be able to improve that? So for me, I have some improvements I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 months now. You know, I'm trying to send more just quick monthly bullet points of, hey, we're doing this and it relates to the new Gen Ed program. We're doing this and it relates to the capstone culminating experience. We're doing this and it highlights the strategic plan. That way, if she's at a cabinet meeting, she can quickly mention it. So those are some things I'm really thinking about, and especially with college cabinet, I'm lucky I don't have a hostile college cabinet. I know some folks might have those types of unfortunate interactions with administrators. Um, I've been on a pretty good sense with that myself, but I would say, try to be particular about who you're talking to. So my most of the library's representation is kind of from the academic side. However, I know that our college cabinet really cares about retention and positive reputation. So a relationship I don't have much of yet is with our vice president of marketing and the director of communications. So that's an area that I could improve. I could reach out to them and say, hey, we are going to try and do a new social media campaign and show all the cool things in the library. The student workers helped me put it together. We're focusing on these parts of the strategic plan. Let's talk about this more. Bringing an actual idea is going to go a lot farther than just hoping that they pay attention to the library in a positive way because of other stuff we're doing. So that's something I'm trying to figure out a little bit better. But I think so far I've seen uh, improvements, which has been really, really helpful and hopeful. I'm going to give you folks like another minute and a half, 2 minutes on just whatever you can think of to add into this part. What's helpful? What are those decision-making powers? How do you might improve FaceTime? I did put one in with my my library director because he's got a lot of stuff he's doing, but his office is next door to mine. So if I pop in for something and we both don't want to do the thing we're about to do, I should probably set a timer for myself and leave his office because I will distract us both. So just thinking through how to use my time and their time in a respectful manner as well. So that's a little part that I've been thinking about. As you folks write, I have a couple examples of what I would call audience mismatch. I didn't necessarily think through the best audience when I first started. A couple like, this is a great idea. I'm going to do this. It's going to go so well. And so learning experiences. I started a lecture series where I was really passionate about, I want to show everybody all the cool standards that librarians have as their like area of expertise and things we care about. So I want to talk about scholarly publishing paywalls, censorship, data privacy, misinformation. I was like, everyone's invited. No limit. Anyone who wants to come. It's during lunch. Terrible planning. No one wants to come at lunch. And with no target audience, it didn't tend to bring in as many people as I thought. So this was a bit of a flub of planning that I have now adjusted, and it's going much better. So this should have been directed at faculty, as here are some course offerings that I can come in and talk to your relevant classes about if they're of interest to you. Because what happened was I sent out this flyer and then I got direct emails back from faculty saying, hey, wish I could make it. The censorship one would be great for my mass communications class. Would you just come in and do it for them? I went, oh, well, that worked better, didn't it? So since then, when I have run one, low attendance. But then I've heard for both sessions, can you come in and do it individually instead? And it went much better. So that was a mismatch of audience. Sometimes we do need a more targeted audience there. And then another one I'm really, really pleased about with the more like money side of the audience is we've changed how I do my own like annual reporting now. So in the past, I would do, performance review in the beginning of the year. Here's what I want to do, and then review it at the end, just with my library director. And we've been thinking through, how do we get other people to understand what our jobs are? And the college went through a restructure where we got a new administrator, and she's pretty open to library things. So we asked, hey, do you want to do my review so you have an idea? And it went really well. In the future, we're going to do it all together, all three of us, so that we all can talk about library functions and value in a way that some administrators might be new to. So after I broke down all the planned projects and showed them my plans for assessment and what I was hoping to do for the year, they had the best question of what might affect this plan from coming to fruition. And I said, oh, staffing and resources. If I'm not able to do the work that I have planned to do and I have to go serve elsewhere in the library, which happens, but if I have to do it a lot, then I'm not going to be able to do that. And thankfully, I think mostly because we got through a lot of that information in the administrator's meeting, she said, oh, that's super helpful to know. If it ever comes up at cabinet about staffing in the library, I'll mention that the reason we're able to do the information literacy work that Mac does is because of the staffing of covering the front desk more often. I was like, Nice. So those little kind of things are slight changes over time of how I'm messaging, how I'm communicating, even in a formal thing like a performance review, involving someone who is open to libraries also. I understand some folks have more hostile kind of interactions and it's can be more negative. So in those cases, I send you thoughts. That's it's difficult. In this case, I had a really open administrator, so we wanted to leverage that. All right. So we're going to move away from the audience now. Hopefully, you've identified at least one person that you serve, that you identify to talk to a lot, and then someone that kind of holds the purse strings of how things operate. And from here, I would say what we really want to focus on is the impact. So, what is going well? What are current successes that you can point to in your particular role? So, there are other successes in our library that I have not listed here. I wanted to think of stuff that I know is affecting me working with students. So I've divided it into that three-legged stool that helps me think of how the library functions: your space, your resources, and your services. So my examples are all things that are working super well at my library right now. You guys have a blank one? Feel free to add in as you go. I did want to say also, because I'm using this as my workbook, all of the images that I have added, I added from my internal like collection of approved marketing images, things I can use so that I can come back to if I do have like I'm on the back foot and I have an ask that I need to say, hey, why are you guys doing this? I can pull resources from my workbook of like, okay, here are some of the things I know are going well. And here's an image of a student in a library that I can add to it to make it a bit more visually impactful. So gathering your resources together is helpful too. So if you guys see the parts where you can add in your own, you could do that too. So some of the things that I've found helpful: space, I feel like is really easy to write up about, like what works well in your space. If you have booking systems, if you have study rooms, that works really well for us. That was a big success for us, was the locations of our study rooms and how we added a new booking system about 3 years ago. We just did the Spring Share add-on module. It was really simple, not super high tech. We just added a walk-up computer that students were able to access very front and center to the building. We've had to do very minimal training on them, and they're booked most of the day now. So students come in, they see a heat map of who's booked where, they can book from that, or they can walk around and find a QR code and book a room individually. And we have not had to explain that to them really. They just inherently understood it given the way that we were putting out the information. So that was a real win there. We also had a really kind of tough example of the daily audiences and the money audience clashing. So we had a student government and our provost a few years ago. We had to address both groups and figure out how we could talk about library hours, because correctly, students wanted the library open more, but we had slowly lost staffing over time. So we tried to address that with both groups, and I'll show you a little bit of that example in the next slide. But resources, think through your databases, think through what you loan at the desk, what works really well that you can say this improves the lives of the daily audience who comes into the library, the patrons who we serve daily. I loved this one from an English 101 student, was using opposing viewpoints for the first time with a matched up assignment for it. And I walked around just to be like, how's it going? He was, well, it's actually really cool. And I was like, love that. It's actually really cool. But I did really enjoy it. And I told him, I was like, I'm probably gonna write that down and keep that somewhere. And he's like, great, I like it. So thinking of ways that you can, again, tell the story, not just say it's useful, have been really helpful for me. So filling that out, I'll give you guys a couple more minutes. But this is a bit more about that example of we had two audiences where we had to figure out how to meet their needs and our impact. And we were a bit stuck, but we didn't want this going on longer. We wanted to be a part of the conversation rather than just hearing, hey, students are upset about this. Heard a murmur of it, and we're like, okay, let's get a meeting with them. So we had a small meeting and we met with the provost first and kind of gave them a bit more of comparison data from other institutions because we just didn't think that data would be useful to our student government at that time. We wanted to show them more of this is what we are thinking when we set hours. We're thinking of safety, we're thinking of access. How do we make sure that you have access to materials and it's not just an open building, which we understand that they do want very much. And we wanted to make sure it was an open discussion. So we really opened it up as we want to hear from you. We will explain with our data that we have, so you have some evidence here. And we also want to hear, what was your like potential solutions? You always hear folks say like, well, why don't you just do this? I'm like, what is that solution that you guys have been saying? I would love to address it and tell you more about why we didn't go with that way, or maybe how we can get closer. And throughout this process, we ended up with a little bump in the budget to get a little bit more staffing and be open later. So it worked really well because we went really slow with it. We didn't overwhelm them with data. The whole presentation was maybe 5 or 6 slides, just giving them, here's the basics. This is our staff over the last 10 years, including things that happened during COVID, which affect a lot. Here's how much the building is used, and here's what we think about. Now let's get your side of it too. So that was one that I thought went really well, of us trying to give the correct information, but framed for different audiences so that they could see the importance. And the provost at the time also was able to see the need from the students, because we invited them to that meeting so they could hear the students' concerns, which was great. All right. The next one is just a repeat of that impact slide. I would say for this sake of time, we'll probably skip the needs slide. You could fill it out later as you would like to. Again, I probably wouldn't ask for things or like together a whole needs presentation if you aren't already doing a lot of work with impact. So that's something, just, cart before horse, show how valuable you are, then ask for things. If you already are showing that, awesome, you can fill out the needs. But that's something that I would maybe do in order there. And this is the part where we start talking about standards and data. So I'm interested if folks want to maybe share in the chat a little bit. I'm hearing all the time, sometimes unprompted, sometimes not at meetings, what data are you collecting and how are you using it to address blank? It could be strategic plan, student success, retention. So if you guys have anything else that you have noticed you're hearing from administrators, faculty, maybe other purse string ones, I'm hearing a little bit on, like AI here and there. How are you adjusting to that? How does it affect career readiness? How does the library impact student success and retention? There's a lot of research data on this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what these folks want to hear. They want to hear what you individually are doing to make sure that your library is causing the same effect that that research data is saying libraries cause. So as much as I'm always tempted to be like, oh, the research says, I'm like, the research says, and also we're doing this. So whatever your current answer is, mine for a long time was, we collect so much data. And that's not really an answer. So now I've changed it to, we collect a lot of data. A lot of it is internal for operations, and then some other parts of it are more of our impact that we have on students. So I am an instruction librarian. I would go back to, for instance, 2 of the classes that I go into have shown really high improvements in their final paper grades, moving up from 43% to 82%, or whatever those exact numbers were, if they attended these workshops where we parse out how to do a paper like that. And also our first year seminars are rating themselves double the percent are more informed on how to do literacy initiatives with online research and library research. So those are the things that I would probably respond to as just, this is what I'm collecting and using, versus I'm collecting a ton. Any questions that you guys had from administrators, Amy, before I move on?
Nothing so far, but feel free to keep chatting in if common questions you might hear from your administrators.
Yeah.
I'll point your attention to it if they come in.
There's another one I would love to, we might have time at the end, but if not, it might be good to put in the chat now for folks. Your
Mhm.
audience side of things, I wanted to ask folks this earlier, but I got to chat and forgot. The ways that you're able to get in front of folks is really important. So I thought it would be helpful if people were open to it, sharing if they're on certain committees at their institutions that they find are really impactful to communicate with. I have found I'm on the general education committee at our school and the curriculum standards committee, a couple others like here and there, but direct to faculty. Those are the ones that I find to be probably the most impactful, because I can speak up for library value in curriculum. And I'm the chair of the general education one, coming from a very interdisciplinary viewpoint. So that was a really important thing that I've kind of worked up to over the last 4 or 5 years here. And it has brought a level of trust of my expertise in instruction and assessment that I probably would not have with our faculty without that. And it's brought me into their sphere a bit more, which has been really great and helpful. So yeah, if you want to share what committees you're on that are helpful, some might be, academic standards or even facilities meetings. Those ones are really important and helpful. So if there's ones that you're on that you would recommend folks if they're looking for that, I think that would be helpful to share out too. All right. Talking about standards, we have a ton of standards at the national level. I've linked out ones that are super common, but again, these are the ones that I first got excited about this work again. I was like, oh yeah, we have all these guidelines. We have united things that we can kind of talk about. We should feel comfortable talking on behalf of like general libraries, especially about our own institutions. We should be really comfortable. No one else knows them better than we do. So I have linked out all of the ALO standards at the top. That's a beast to go through. So I've also pulled out some that I think might be relevant to other folks too. The Plan for Excellence that has the standards for libraries and higher education, the ACRL Academic Toolkit LibGuide, Access Services Librarianship Standards from ACRL, the RUSA standards for reference and user services, a couple Bill of Rights, academic freedom. ACRL also has some more on academic freedom as well. Especially also staffing and leveraging that stuff. I will say the ACRL's joint statement on faculty status of college and university librarians. It's a helpful statement, and then it also has two standards, one of which of how to measure standards for faculty status, how to measure ones for not faculty status. That could be something useful to you. If you tend to be doing a lot of work that ends up on the faculty side, maybe that's something to bring to an administrator and say, hey, most other institutions, my role is faculty status, and it might not get you anywhere the first time, but it might be something to work on over time of these are general standards. And then, of course, framework for information literacy, one I live by. Um, I'm also interested if folks want to add in here, just as your own workbook, what are your local standards and goals? So your institution's mission and vision statement, that's really helpful to link back everything you're doing to the strategic plan of your institution. If you're in a flux, like you're in a year where they're developing a new one, link the old one, or maybe they might have a short-term one-year goal document. Same with the library strategic plan and goals. If you don't have one, do you have a one-year goals that you're trying to meet? Also, if you're at a larger institution, you might have department ones. I'm at a quite small one, so we don't have a department within the library from there. But if you do, this would be a good place to put some of that information. As you link those, I'll just start talking a bit about data. So one of the things that I have found helpful as I'm trying to communicate these stories better is what is internal data? What is shareable data? We collect a ton of data. Um, so that's something that I am very passionate about figuring out. Data can go stale. If you're collecting it but not using it, why are you spending the time collecting it? We need to decide which areas to focus on collecting and managing, which is great because we do that with a ton of stuff, whether that's, basic circ stats and things like that. But there's other stuff that we collect, manage, and want to share. And from here, I will say the data that you share and those kind of things, think of permission and anonymity that you might need to consider. That book, The Critical Data Storytelling for Librarians, talks a lot about how to ethically use data to storytell. So if you do have questions, I do highly recommend that as a great follow-up book for how to consider shareable data versus internal data and how to use it in stories. I would also consider what is additional evidence that might not be what we consider just data points and metrics. So I would advise creating an anecdote file. I have one that I hold for the library, and I tell everyone that I work with if they hear something nice, please send it to me and I will add it to the files. And sometimes, if it's something more with like students in instruction assessment or survey data, I will ask them if I can use their responses and I won't use their names, and they are cool with that. But the anecdotes file is working really well. It's where I have one that I'm really excited for my library director to use at the next time he gets to talk to cabinet. The CFO recently told him he was one of her most exemplary budget managers. And I'm like, you use that the next time you might hear that like cuts are coming or things like that. The library is exemplary managed right now. So little things like that are good to just keep with you as well. Wear and tear furniture is a big one too when you're talking about space. If that's your area, evidence is there. So this next one is just fill outable. So as you start to think of what is the data you present, what's the data you use internally, you can fill those out into like, this is my internal bucket, this is my shareable data bucket. This is how I intend to use it. As you folks do that, we're not going to look at these, but these are some, I'll call them case studies. Um, there's some kind of more national examples. I've talked more about, my internal, institutional, maybe more small potatoes, things that I am working on or impacts or, staffing and space within my own library. But these are the ones that, made the national news with changes that really aggressively affected library functions at universities. And I think they're really important to review. You may know them very well, especially the Vermont case if you are in the Northeast. But these ones are ones that I would highly recommend just reviewing and thinking through what kind of response would you have in your role, remembering that every role in the library is a leadership role in some way. So how would you respond to some of these things? The Texas A&M one was a loss of faculty status after a consultant came in and restructured the universities. The Vermont State University Libraries one might be more familiar, as I said to folks. That one was the classic digital versus print. A new president came in and it was very buzzworthy and viral for a long time. Um, so both of those things, likely because they're on Library Journal, talk about the national standards that are affected by this, that affect students. So access to information is huge, intellectual freedom principles. So how do we make sure folks know that we are affecting access to information, intellectual freedom principles, um, even if we end up in the hot water of these kind of situations? Yes, we don't have time to dig into them a bunch, but they're, I would say, hugely important cases on the potential stakes of how we're viewed by others. And it might not be your current state of affairs, but we are affected by, national news and how things are being influenced at a higher level as well. All right. This is one to return to. I'm going to quickly skip by it. But these are just fun messaging ideas in and out of the library to use. They could be like cool signage, office things, fun demonstrations, things I've pulled from different webinars and books that I've read that I was like, great. And I've tried a few and I've liked a lot of them. Wayfinding is one that I am particularly into these days. Having things be a bit more passive for folks to understand is awesome. Presentation options. So we might not make it through all of this one because I do want to show you guys the last slide too and give a couple minutes. But this one I would fill out with your strengths and identify within storytelling, which is a huge field, so hard to break down in a couple minutes. How are you comfortable communicating? Are you, great with writing? Are you a big presenter? Do you love to do the small talks kind of things? Great, put that in what you're comfortable with. If you struggle in an area, who else, your daily audience or your colleagues, do you think could help with that? Student workers are great programs to help with. How can they be your daily audience that helps communicate things sometimes? And the biggest thing I would think about is these are different. Who's the most authoritative voice of the information and who's the most authentic voice of the information? I would say when I'm talking about the outcomes of an instruction session or why I think it's important, I'm probably the most authoritative voice on that in my realm, but I might not be the most authentic voice to explain that to students. So in that case, I would want someone that's their peer, someone that they are going to trust and say, no, that did like really help my paper. I came in for 3 reference appointments and I felt like I know how to do this now. I'm like, great. So that's the stuff that we need to figure out who tells the story now that we have who we're going to tell it to, what we're going to tell them, what the big impact is, the data and why it's important, who tells it and why. If you have college and university marketing and branding guidelines, I'd add them to this page here so you can think about how am I presenting, how am I doing that, and then same with like files or photos. That's one that I've been kind of putting throughout mine as well, and I find it really helpful to just have it all in one spot. Again, tons of text, probably wouldn't do it another way, but things that I think about. So storytelling, the entire field. The example styles are up there. I won't go over those. I highly recommend this book. It is hyperlinked if you want to go to it on the ALA store. But there's frameworks. So I would say most higher level administrators in libraries, maybe management, would be better off or more interested maybe in telling the library or college's brand as a narrative, like, oh, how'd the building come to be? Were there transition times? Was there a big renovation? Are there unique spaces? That could be probably an interesting thing in that case. That might be your focus. Another frame could be individual services or space. That kind of feels more like where I tend to fit in. So you could do a story or a narrative once you have data on ILL of like, here's a day in the life of an ILL book. I'm going to watch it go this way. And instead of just give you the data, I'm going to show the data throughout a narration. A research guide builds sped up. This is how many things I put into the landing page where you need to find information. Displays step by step. All of these things could be told in certain ways. Diverse users, same kind of thing. Think of your users as the heroes of a story, and we are the thing that helps them with their struggle. Can your student workers in particular help with this one? So these are ideas that I meet with our student workers, even though I'm not their supervisor, and they came up with some hilarious ones recently. They're like, well, what if the story was late night paper writing? I'm like, love it, but we're going to need some stuff to say within that. We're going to need some data and some reasons. So I was like, love the idea. Don't just start filming that. We're going to talk. And then they also loved favorite study spots to cry and then lock in. I was like, love that. A little dark, guys, but okay, we'll find something with that. So kind of thinking through how your users can see themselves in the library is really helpful. That could be a whole frame. And then thinking more of maybe like social impact. How's the community affected? So those are all different like narrations that you could use to tell those data pieces in a better way. These are the blank ones that you guys can fill out. There's a couple here. You can always, copy paste, make more. Here are some references, those different ones that I found super helpful. And thank you. So I would love to hear from folks if they have any questions, or even if they're just themselves struggling with a way to do something and they want to talk about it. Happy to do that. We can stop recording if that's the case too. So thanks, folks.
Thank you so much, Mac. While we're waiting, we'll take a few minutes and see if anybody chats in questions, or feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
One thing that did come up, so when you were asking about committees that people serve on, so a few people mentioned that that librarians are actually they're not invited to participate on committees.
Yep.
And then, and additionally, there was a comment too about like committees not necessarily being viewed as valuable on the library campus because often like work, it's like a place to sort of like permanently put things that you're just like never going to address. So you can like, or my interpretation was you can say you're addressing it by sending it to committee, but the sort of understanding is that that's where you like put it
Yep.
to wait, to not really have to do anything. So somebody else mentioned that then they were always sort of talking with their library director about ways to interact directly with faculty. So I'm kind of curious, like, what are other ways to have those kinds of, besides committees, what are some other ways?
I'll jump in first, but if folks have ones, please jump out too. It definitely depends on if you are faculty status or not, um, as to how much inherent responsibility you'll have, and how functional those committees really are. We have a parking committee. I wouldn't recommend anyone join that one. That one's no thanks. But I will say there's others that are directly affected on, how things are operating on campus. So that's great. But I also have just done a lot of outreach myself, and I like go to a lot of open meetings. I'll go and do outreach and email departments and ask if they want to come in, and I'll bring coffee and like just talk to them about what their program looks like. I tend to do a lot of research into what we have available to look through syllabi and what we call our master course outlines. So the database of these are the courses we offer to try to figure out myself. So sometimes it takes a lot of just like back end research as to what is happening on campus and can I go after those folks and try to kind of court their attention. So those are some areas I've found work well. The first year seminar folks, English faculty, and the general education faculty are the ones that I've made the most headway with.
Great, thanks, Mac. I'm going to stop recording now.